Last week we looked at gaining wisdom, and this morning we're going to look at the dangers of folly. So we're looking at the two great opposites of the book of Proverbs, right? Wisdom, folly. And I kind of want to remind you, we went through these different definitions last week, and sorry about that. I'll try to hit the off button when I do it. The wise, and we talked about the fact that there's different kinds of wisdom in the world. There's a worldly wisdom as well as a godly wisdom. But as we talk about Proverbs, and as we talk about wisdom literature, the wise are those who behave in a morally upright way. And these are the people, any of us not make any mistakes? Okay. The fact that you're laughing, I think, indicates we all know we made mistakes. But we're correctable, aren't we? The wise person is correctable. When they know they've gone off course from what God desires, they're able to correct their course. The next word is the simple. And the simple are without moral direction. And so because they're without moral direction, what do you think happens to them? They veer off into the wrong things, right? We really have to set our direction to do what's right. And the simple are those who are easily persuaded to join in the wrong. So they lack prudence. And prudence is a word I like, because I think we live in a culture that doesn't want to have any prudence. So what is prudence? It's the ability to look ahead and see the consequences of your actions. Are you able to do that? Wisdom is being able to do that. We can know certain things are wrong, and we also can know that certain things have painful consequences attached to them. So if we are aware of that, that should help us steer clear of it. Now, the fool in wisdom literature is the morally deficient person. It's not just the silly person. You know, words can mean that. You know, we can play the fool and simply be silly. But in Proverbs, within Psalms, within all the wisdom literature, and, you know, I think even as we expand that into other places in Scripture, the fool is a person who's morally deficient or who is not following God's direction, his ways. And so it's a serious matter. You know, I think when we come from our cultural context and we hear the word fool, we don't immediately think, oh, that's bad. That's really bad. But if we hear it from the vantage point of Proverbs and the wisdom literature, being the fool is the worst thing you could be. Being the fool is the worst thing you could be. Now, I want us to look at some of the dangers of folly. And we're going to take a look at some Proverbs. Turn to Proverbs 5, verse 23. I suspect I have more written down than we'll get to, but that's okay. I think it's helpful to get some of these dangers up on the screen so that we can see them and reflect upon them. He dies for lack of discipline, and because of his great folly, he is led astray. Now, what would we say from this verse? What does folly do? What is its dangers? I see two things in here. Go ahead and shout them out. What? Okay. Die, I think ESV has led astray. Is that the New American Standard? Okay. And the other is he's undisciplined. So let me get that up on the screen. Folly is undisciplined and leads astray. It's going to lead you to bad consequences. And sometimes those bad consequences can be death. Right at the beginning of Proverbs, there's the warning about don't cast your lot in with violent men who are in the violence for gain, right? They're in for robbery. And it's described as the person who goes that way is as foolish as having a net spread in front of them and they see the net. The birds are going to stay away from a net spread in front of them, but you're going straight ahead into it knowing full well that the path of violence, what does the path of violence lead to? More violence, right? So, leads astray, gets us in the bad places, and is undisciplined. Let me give you another one that kind of reflects the undisciplined part. Proverbs 21:20. Precious treasure and oil are in the wise man's dwelling, but a foolish man devours it. What are we learning about the fool and folly here? No plan for the future? Now, I will admit that there's people in probably every culture who are living kind of a subsistence lives, and they consume everything that comes in because there's so little. But for most of us, and most people in the culture that Proverbs was written in, there was enough that you could save some for the future, for that need. And by the way, do needs arise when you need extra funds ever in life? Okay. When Kathy and I were younger, that was always much harder because we didn't have as much coming in, we didn't have the ability to save quite as we did. One of my jokes is no one ever gives you much money and wages until you turn 40. And I think there's a certain element of truth in that. And then it becomes a little easier. But the wise person lives a more disciplined, restrained life so that he can take care of his needs. Turn to Proverbs 19:13. This one is in a context. Chapter 9 begins with wisdom being personified as a woman. And she is trying to persuade people to come into her house. The opposite begins in verse 13, where folly is personified as a woman. Okay? I'm going to read verse 13 in the ESV, and we'll come back to that in just a second. The woman folly is loud, she is seductive, and knows nothing. Now, if you don't have the ESV, instead of seductive, you probably have something like simple, right? I'm looking at Scott because I know he has a New American Standard in front of him. Naive, okay. And this is one of these translation difficulties. And I'm not certain which I prefer. I feel like naive and simple isn't exactly what folly is in the context here. So seductive sounds to me more appealing as a translation. But the question has to do with Hebrew is made up of three-letter roots. And so going for seductive is going for one root, and going for simplicity or naivete is going for the other root. And I'm not certain which is the best choice. I know why the translations differ, but I don't know enough to give you a good, educated decision one way or the other. But if we back up and look at this entire passage, seduction is what's going on, right? Matter of fact, when we use words like entice and seduce, we really mean persuade, but persuade towards evil, right? So wisdom is out there trying to persuade those to come in and take up what wisdom offers. Folly's doing the same thing. Even if the ESV is wrong on the word seduce here. That's what's going on in the context. Because look at what she's saying. Stolen water is sweet. This is verse 17. I'll let you get there. Stolen water is sweet, and bread eaten in secret is pleasant. Why do you think you're eating the bread in secret? Okay? Chances are it's stolen too, right? And so Folly is out there trying to make her case that stealing is a good thing. In fact, if you look through the beginning of Proverbs, a lot of it isn't Proverbs, it's narrative. And we come to this section where wisdom is personified and folly is personified. And Proverbs has been presenting this choice all along. I've already given you one, violent men. The other one is sexual immorality. And the author, Solomon, is picturing the simple man who goes out where he knows the adulterous woman is. And it's as if he's trying to get close to her and a little closer to her, and then he gets entrapped. Well, prudence would have said, stay away, right? If you know there's a seductive adulteress over here, don't go near her. So this seductiveness of folly is something that's real. Don't we have people in the world trying to persuade people to do things that are wrong and portraying it as the thing to do? And yet, folly lacks wisdom. It really doesn't know what needs to be known. Number 3. Proverbs 12:23. A prudent man conceals knowledge, but the heart of fools proclaims folly. Or turn to Proverbs 13:16. In everything the prudent acts with knowledge, but a fool flaunts his folly. I think the New American Standard has spread out. Flaunt, I kind of like flaunt. Folly just lets you know, just puts it out there. And the point that I want to make here is similar to the one I've just made, but folly will be proclaimed around us. Folly is going to be proclaimed around us. And we need to realize that, and we need to have our discernment turned on. If you've been watching television And in this group, I think I can say, for the last 20 years, easily, teen group, I can't say that, but this group, maybe I can get away with 20 years. Some of you, I know it's longer. Or watching movies. Have there been any messages that we would call folly in any of that? I was in my 20s, I guess. This TV program was a police show, and it was in the 70s. I think it was one of the first times a homosexual character was presented in a favorable light. And I watched the show and I said, there's an agenda here. This didn't just happen. There was a purpose to that. So I want you to know, folly is going to be proclaimed all around us, and we need to be discerning. That's just going to be a part of it. We have a world in which we have to choose God's wisdom versus the wisdom of the world, God's wisdom versus the folly, which is what the wisdom of the world really is. And we need to have some discernment about it. Oh, let me back up to 12:23. The prudent man conceals knowledge. Why does the prudent man conceal knowledge? I think the answer is the prudent man knows how to use knowledge wisely. Are there times when maybe sharing too much is a bad thing? I think so. So even the wise man knows there are times not to share things where the foolish man is they're just spreading it all out there. Folly and everything. Okay, next one. Proverbs 14:8. The wisdom of the prudent is to discern his way, but the folly of fools is deceiving. Folly is deceptive. Now, why is folly deceptive? Okay, folly can look good. There can be some glitz and glamour and packaging before you get to the bitter part of it. I think the reason folly is deceptive is because sin is deceptive. When you're being enticed to do something wrong, you're not being given a list of all the things that can go wrong if you do this, right? Sin is not like the American pharmaceuticals who have to put up on the screen and have someone say really, really fast all the terrible things that can happen to you if you take this medication. It's a wonder that any of us take medication, right? Given all the warning labels. And I can joke about that because I take a lot of medication with multiple myeloma and heart valves and all of that. But folly is deceptive because sin is deceptive. Number 5. Turn to Proverbs 10:1, which begins with the Proverbs of Solomon, which is a section divider. I'll begin after that. A wise son makes a glad father, but a foolish son is a sorrow to his mother. Now, this is another one where the lines are unbalanced a bit. Is a foolish son painful to the father too? Yeah, he is. So the fact that it's said this way, these are unbalanced lines, and we can infer their sorrow for both. But the unbalance is a wise son being compared to a foolish son. So we see this point. Folly is painful to others. Folly is painful to others. And some of you know what that can be like as parents. You may have experienced some of this pain. Proverbs 11:29. This gives us another family one. Whoever troubles his own household will inherit the wind, and the fool will be a servant to the wise of heart. What do you inherit when you inherit the wind? Nothing. Nothing. Or maybe even worse, right? We've all seen the damage Ian did. There's some wind. Not only do you inherit nothing, but you may lose what you have with wind. Why is the fool maybe pictured as someone who becomes a servant to the wise?
He always owes him. You know, he's always owes the wise, because the servant is always leaning on the wise to bail him out.
Okay. It may be indebtedness. It may be something else. But again, we see foolishness can cause pain for those who are near and dear around you. Now, this one moves beyond family. Proverbs 26:6. Whoever sends a message by the hand of a fool cuts off his own feet and drinks violence. Now, why is it that way? We'll kind of use our imaginations on this one a little bit. Okay, faster and better. What could the fool do to your message? Okay, could distort it. Maybe the message gets there somewhat intact, but the fool can insinuate things that you had no intention of being insinuated, and may make matters worse. So here again, the fool is painful to other people. Here's another one, Proverbs 26:10. Like an archer who wounds everyone. Now let me just stop there. Do you want an archer who wounds everyone? No. You want archers who hit the enemy, not your own troops. So we kind of understand the image here. Like an archer who wounds everyone is one who hires a passing fool or a drunkard. And again, the picture here is of damage being done from the fool's behavior. Damage is done. Next one. Take a look at Proverbs 15:14. The heart of him who has understanding seeks knowledge, but the mouths of fools feed on folly. How would you want to summarize that one? I'm going to put up there, folly is a choice to be avoided. The wise person is seeking wisdom. They're choosing wisdom. And I don't know about you, but I think choosing wisdom is a process that goes on in our life because we keep choosing wisdom. But the fool is just going to folly all the time. Folly is a choice. It is a moral choice. Got a comment here? Patrick?
Thank you.
Maybe you wanted to comment and maybe you didn't.
Well, I did. I was thinking about the choice. And the beginning of wisdom, of course, is the knowledge of God.
Mm-hmm. Fear of God.
And fear of God. And we're always at that, I guess, crossroads.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but the more we see God, the more these things get choked out, can be choked out. The world, like you said earlier, has a wisdom, and certainly godly wisdom is where we're trying to go and be led of the Spirit. Anytime we leave the Spirit, which is the Lord never leaves us, we wind up maybe falling prey to these things. And so that's where it is. It's just study and application. Okay. To avoid these pitfalls.
Okay. I think we make choices of, what we are going to take in. And we may take in some things that are not always right, but we're critical of them. That can happen. It's hard to tune out the world completely. But we can be critical, we can have critical thinking as we hear those parts of the world. But there are choices that have to be made. And I think putting folly up here as a choice means, as Proverbs always does, holds the fool up to, what do I want to say? Responsibility. When they do immoral things, they're responsible for the choices they've made. Proverbs 14:24. The crown of the wise is their wealth, but the folly of fools brings folly. Now, what does wealth mean in Proverbs? No, it's usually referring to material things, but what does it mean? Well, it doesn't necessarily mean you're a billionaire or a millionaire, right? It means that you've worked hard, you've saved, you've provided for your family, you've been generous. And that's what? Yeah, it's associated with wisdom, and it's probably a gradual sort of thing. Since I'm looking at a lot of people who are older, as evidenced by some of the gray hair, we've got some exceptions here, but do you have more money now than you did when you were 30? Okay. Why? Because you were prudent, right? You saved some of it. For some of us gray-haired people, we're in retirement. And There was some preparation that had to be done and for that to take place. So, you know, there's a crown. And I think the fact that this is the crown, this means this has been a process in this wise person's life. But the process in the fool is he just keeps bringing up folly. Folly, 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 folly. So folly is a choice to be avoided.
Ross, when you think back, there are times when we had to think and make choices in our lives as we were growing. And we made choices, I would guess most of us here, that brought us to the level that we're at in our wealth or our comfort. But there are others that if you, I've had friends that spent everything as they gained it. I mean, they just, that's what I would consider folly in this regard, I think.
Okay. I think Proverbs would view it as folly too. Got a hand up here, Bob, as he races from one place to the next. We're giving Bob his exercise.
Yeah, in 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 8, Paul reminded Timothy, "And having food and raiment, let us be therewith content." I mean, that's wealth. There's a lot of people that don't have much of either.
Yeah, I don't think it's about the amount. It's about the idea you can take care of yourself. And greater amount doesn't necessarily mean satisfaction and happiness. Take a look at, I've got more of these, but take a look at Proverbs 12:15. The way of a fool is right in his own eyes, but a wise man listens to advice. Now, if you're thinking about this proverb, just because it's right in his own eyes, is it right? Answer no. I see people shaking their heads no. So again, folly is this choice. And a lot depends on whether we're going to have the fear of God, reverence for God, listening to his word. All these are things from last week. Listening to good advice, all those things. People choose folly. Folly leads to sinful behavior. Turn to Proverbs 14:29. Whoever is slow to anger has great understanding, but he who has hasty temper exalts folly. There's some of these proverbs that I think, boy, there's a lot of people in our world need to read this one. Well, what do you think? I was in the doctor's office on Friday, waiting for the doctor to come in, looking around at the signage on the walls. I had that to read, and so I was reading it. And one of the signs said, "This is a healing place. Violence of any type is not tolerated." I don't remember reading that on doctors' offices' walls 20 years ago. What about you? I took my father-in-law to get some blood work done. We were entering Metro Hospital, and they were introducing their canine security team. I don't remember that 20 years ago. What about you? Jeremy, one of our members, is security for one of the hospitals here. And he is now at the level of carrying a taser, and some of the security guard are carrying firearms. And some of this is just anger that people have not learned how to control, and it bursts out in violent acts. This is just one that hits our culture square in the face. There's just a lot of this over trivial things. You read about someone being shot or stabbed, and you find out the reason, and you think, well, if I'd been having a bad day and had that happen to me, I wouldn't want to make my bad day into a worse day where I was going to go to jail. Right? Wouldn't it be better to drop the matter, walk away, go get a coffee somewhere, just do something else? And yet this is this idea that temper just takes control. Proverbs 10, verse 23. Doing wrong is like a joke to the fool. Your translation may have laughter or something like that. But wisdom is pleasure to a man of understanding. And really, isn't this a contrast between two kinds of pleasure? The joke or the laughter, doing wrong, versus the pleasure of doing things with understanding. So again, folly leads to sinful behavior. Folly is to be avoided because it's harmful. Proverbs 17:12. You know, some of the Proverbs are humorous, and this is one to me that's funny. Let a man meet a she-bear robbed of her cubs rather than a fool in his folly. Anybody want to meet a she-bear, a bear missing its cubs? Wouldn't that be kind of dangerous, frightening? Matter of fact, I have a general rule of staying away from bears. What about you? I see these videos of people on trips getting close to bears, and I think, no, I wouldn't want to do that. But here's the idea of avoid folly because it's going to lead to harm. No, they're not. Trying to choose which one I'm going to read because I'm looking at the clock too. Proverbs 15:21. Folly is a joy to him who lacks sense, but a man of understanding walks straight ahead. In other words, the man of understanding doesn't turn and get involved in folly. Why? Well, they know folly is to be avoided. Folly's harmful. Don't get into this. Avoid it. Folly is hard to change. And in putting this up, I want to make certain we understand the gospel has the power to change people. And we're never certain which heart will be touched by the gospel and a great change come over them. But we also know certain things in life are so addictive in some way that they're harder to change. Proverbs 26:11. Like a dog that returns to his vomit is a fool who repeats his folly. The fool doesn't realize that what they've done is this terrible mess, and they just keep going back to it. It's hard to break the cycle. Or Proverbs 17:10. Yeah. A rebuke goes deeper into a man of understanding than 100 blows into a fool. What does that say to you about the fool? It's hard for them to accept correction. It's hard for them to change. Final one. Nearly out of time. Folly is ruinous for those who follow it. Proverbs 14:1. The wisest of women builds her house, but folly with her own hands tears it down. Have you ever seen families just kind of self-destruct and you look at what's going on and it's folly? It's what Scripture would call folly. It's sinful behavior. Proverbs 5:23, he dies for lack of discipline, and because of his great folly, he's led astray. Or Proverbs 10:8, the wise of heart will receive commandments, but a babbling fool will come to ruin. It's ruinous. The Old Testament doesn't always have a clear view of what lies after death, although I think it does have a view of life after death, and I see it particularly in the Psalms. But we, at this point after the cross, know that there are consequences about how we live our life, and there are destinations, more than one, and it will depend on our faith in Christ and how we've lived. And folly is ruinous. We know it will not go to the good place. Thank you very much for being here. We've looked at the two big contrasts in Proverbs. And next week, having done the big broad strokes, we're going to get down into some nitty-gritty, like how we use our words. And most of us, when we start thinking about that, well, we may get our toes stepped on just a little bit. Words can get us in trouble, and most of us have probably done it. We've gotten ourselves in trouble with our words. So I hope you'll be back, even if your toes are stepped on. Thanks.